Welcome back, beer tubers. Ryan here, back to another episode of San Diego Beer Vlog. Thanks for joining me. Today we're looking at a beer from HopWired, and this is their fresh HopWired IPA. New Zealand IPA, that is, 7.3%. Just read the description. They talk about using two different wet hops, and they did two different batches to create this beer. The first batch, they got fresh, wet Motueka hops, made a beer out of that, and then they got fresh Nelson Sauvin hops in. Took those two batches of beer, blended them together to form fresh HopWired. So let's check this out. I'm looking forward to it. If I remember right, the regular version had maybe a bit more New Zealand hop varieties in it. Can't remember for sure, but these two particular ones are certainly favorites of mine. Appearance-wise, it's pretty dark for an IPA, at least compared to a lot of the California IPAs. It's really just a very hazy orange color. There's about a half finger. The head's pretty bright white though, so probably using a little more caramel malt than some of the IPAs out here. Let's get the aroma. Definitely has that wet hop character, which tends to be a little more leafy, a little more herbal, a little more like green smelling, but in a good way. So you certainly get that. I definitely get a lot of sweet breadiness, some caramel malts coming through in the nose as well. Certainly some of that white wine character, touch of spicy mango coming from the Motueka. Yeah, it smells like a fairly balanced IPA on the nose, so let's give it a taste. Cheers. Yeah, that's nice. It's not overly bitter. Certainly get some bitterness up front. Ton of hop flavor right middle of the palate. Then it finishes with those malts coming through. There's some sweetness, kind of helps balance out the bitterness and the hop flavors, and rounds out real nicely on the back end. This one certainly drinks different than their regular HopWired. Definitely getting more of that piney, dank character, resiny character that you tend to get a little bit more with those fresh hops. Leaves a little bit of like that herbal character as well. But you do have some of those tropical fruit notes coming through. They're just not quite as apparent maybe if they're using pellet hops. You get some of that white wine character coming from the Nelson, the kind of spicy sauce-like mango character of Motueka. Yeah, those two kind of definitely balance each other out nicely in the flavor profile. But like that bitterness tends to be a little more atypical of New Zealand hops. But I think it's just maybe the fact they're using whole leaf fresh hops to give it that kind of different character to the beer. Not sure if they're using other hops to bitter it, maybe to give that a little different character either, if they're just using finishing wet hops. Wet hop beers are really tricky because you're dealing with hops that are not dried, so you have to use a lot more to get the same bitterness levels. So they're, depending on how you want to brew them and what your definition is, they can be a little less bitter than your typical IPAs. With this one, I wish there was less of that sweeter caramel malt, that kind of really sweet bread caramel malt backbone to it. You know, it does help to balance it out fairly well, but I think it'd be a little more refreshing and you get to taste those wet hops a little more if they kind of dialed that back a bit and just kind of maybe just use a single base malt and just kind of, I really on these fresh hop beers, I want to taste the fresh hops in the beer, and I think the malt kind of helps cover it up a little bit too much in this particular beer. But I do recommend picking it up if you can find it, get it, put it in your refrigerator if it's not refrigerated already, drink it as soon as possible. These particular beers, especially wet hop or fresh hop IPAs, are meant to be drank as fresh as possible. So it was a bit of a gamble getting this one all the way from New Zealand, but it's worth it. HopWired is a great brewery. This one I'm going to go with a B on it. I think it's really solid. It doesn't quite pop like the regular IPA does with all those huge tropical, juicy tropical fruit notes. But this could be a bit of an older bottle that's kind of developing some different flavors as it goes. So it's going to wrap it up. Until next time, please comment, subscribe. Cheers.